Live Aid, the multi-venue benefit concert that assembled more than 70 of the best artists and bands around the world for an incredible performance that would go down in history. Attended by over 160,000 people and watched by roughly 1.9 billion around the world, Live Aid stands as the ultimate rock and roll concert ever to be held and is likely to remain so. But how on earth did Live Aid come to be? How was it that two visionaries, driven by immense passion, were able to organize a project of this size and being able to reunite bands that had been broken up for years? How was it so perfectly executed that Queen managed to give the greatest live performance in the history of rock and roll in just 21 minutes? And how could such a project driven by generosity, philanthropy, and solely good intentions possibly receive criticism? This is the story of Live Aid, the most ambitious and important music project of all time.
It's 12 noon in London, 7 a.m. in Philadelphia, and around the world it's time for Live Aid.
Let's start from the very beginning. What really was the initial spark for this ambitious project? How could anything possibly launch such a big event? Well, the answer makes sense. Let's start by going all the way back to the very source of the primary force behind this musical phenomenon. It all started with a crisis taking place in Africa. Rewinding back to early 1980s, Ethiopia had faced a devastating famine going on from 1983 throughout 1985, which is considered the worst in a century. It impacted roughly 7.8 million people, leaving 300,000 to 1.2 million dead and 2.5 million displaced internally, with 400,000 fleeing as refugees. Human rights violations made the situation worse, and they caused more than half of the deaths. The hardest hit regions were those with limited infrastructure and ongoing rebellions. The famine occurred amidst the Ethiopian civil war, with drought officially blamed as the main cause. But in reality, military policies also played a significant role, according to Human Rights Watch and Oxfam. That's when, in 1984, a BBC News report, led by the famous journalist Michael Burke, was the first to document the famine in Ethiopia, showing pictures of hundreds of thousands of people starving to death. In the news report, Burke referred to the situation as the closest thing to hell on earth. The news broadcast had huge impact on the awareness of the situation, with several British public helping organizations starting donations and campaigns to support the situation. The report even had worldwide impact, and it was broadcasted in its entirety with no edits on a major US news channel, which was close to unheard of at the time. The horrible situation in Ethiopia eventually became the catalyst and reason for the creation of the Live Aid concert. However, initially, the International Multi-Venue Benefit Concert wasn't the first idea following the raised awareness of the crisis. Instead, there was a smaller initiative which would turn out to be a pivotal step in the journey of breathing life to the Live Aid project. This first initiative was started by one specific person being especially upset by the report: the Irish singer and songwriter Bob Geldof. Geldof was the frontman of the band Boomtown Rats. Although not known for their widest discography, they did have some hit songs including I Don't Like Mondays and Rat Trap. If you're a Pink Floyd fan, you might have also seen Geldof starring as Pink in Pink Floyd's 1982's film The Wall. However, after seeing the report, he felt an urge to do something about it. The urge was so strong that he immediately called his friend Midge Ure, who was the singer of the band Ultravox. Interestingly enough, Ure and Geldof had already worked together for charity when appearing at the 1981 benefit show The Secret Policeman's Ball in London. Therefore, it really wasn't a surprise that this report upset the two artists and sparked a frustration that would showcase their passionate minds. As the two friends talked, they quickly agreed on writing a song together as a fundraiser for the famine relief. They went on to write the famous Christmas song, Do They Know It's Christmas?, with Geldof being responsible for the lyrics and Ure taking care of melody and backing track.
You know, I'll put together something, you put together something, and let's see what we come up with.
As for recording, the two had a strong network in the Irish and British music industry and was able to gather some great musicians to form a spontaneous supergroup that would go by the legendary name Band Aid. The recording took place over the course of 24 hours on the 25th of November 1984. The short time span made it a difficult task for busy living musicians to drop everything in their hands and join the recording. With that said, the two visionaries managed to pull some great artists including Paul Weller, Sting, Bill Hadley, as well as Simon Le Bon from Duran Duran. Phil Collins would later go on to record the drums. The song went on to enter the UK singles chart at #1 and remain there for 5 weeks. Not only that, but it also became the fastest-selling single in UK chart history at the time, with 1 million copies sold the first week. This incredible arrangement marked the important first step of what would eventually evolve into Live Aid. Additionally, the song inspired musicians on the other side of the Pacific to do a similar thing. Only a month after its release, a supergroup was formed in the US, taking the name USA for Africa. It comprised some of the era's best-known musicians, and the writers for their song, We Are the World, was none other than Michael Jackson and Lionel Richie. Other musicians taking part in the project included Bruce Springsteen, Tina Turner, Bob Dylan, Billy Joel, and even Bob Geldof himself. Although Bob Geldof and Midge Ure were the driving forces and the organizers for the Live Aid project, it wasn't them who had the initial idea of staging a charity concert. During the recording of Do They Know It's Christmas, there was one man particularly interested in the making of the song, the lead singer of Culture Club, Boy George. In fact, he was so absorbed by the idea of creating this song that after receiving an invite from Geldof to join, George, who was currently in the US for the band's world tour, took a Concorde jet from New York City to London at his own expense to record his solo part.
The laziest in the world gets up, gets a car, gets on the Concorde and arrives at 6 p.m?
At the end of Culture Club's world tour, they had 6 concerts in the UK at the Wembley Stadium. On the final night on December 22, 1984, the band was accompanied by none other than their fellow Band Aid members, in which they, of course, performed an encore together. Do They Know It's Christmas? Boy George said that this performance had a huge impact on him as he was overcome by its power and emotional effects. This feeling sparked the idea to organize a benefit concert, in which he immediately told the only person who he knew who would commit to such an ambitious task, Bob Geldof. It was clear that Geldof was the right man to ask. In an interview with the UK music magazine Melody Maker in January 1985, shortly after George had pitched his idea, Geldof showed great enthusiasm, and it became clear that he had thought about it almost non-stop since, given his early formed views on how it should be done. This is what he said in the interview: "The show should be as big as is humanly possible. There's no point just 5,000 fans turning up at Wembley. We need to have Wembley linked with Madison Square Gardens, and the whole show to be televised worldwide. It would be great for Duran to play 3 or 4 numbers at Wembley, and then flick to Madison Square where Springsteen would be playing." Geldof's mind was set. He wanted to organize a multi-venue benefit concert held both in the UK and the US at the same time, featuring the greatest musicians alive. But now was the question: how on earth could such an event be arranged, and how did they manage to do it in such a short time? Be aware that the planning started early in 1985, while the concerts were held only a few months later, 13th of July, 1985. Well, the first and most important priority was getting artists on board. Not surprisingly, the first bands to be set in stone was the bands of the organizers themselves, Boomtown Rats and Ultravox. But what is more surprising is that the band of the man who came up with the idea, Boy George's Culture Club, didn't take part in the concert itself. The reason for this actually became clear only a few years back, when George spoke about it on the podcast Grounded with Louis Theroux. "I messed it up. I was otherwise engaged chemically. I mean, I think it was a stroke of luck that we didn't do it because I wasn't in a fit state to do it. We were originally asked, but then I think everyone was just looking at the state of me and going, this might be more harmful than good." So they basically didn't follow up on it. Luckily though, there weren't many other bands and artists from the recording of Do They Know It's Christmas that left out. The remaining artists were all very enthusiastic about the project, including U2, Sting, Wham, and Duran Duran. This gave Geldof and Midge Ure an excellent starting point. With a solid base of great artists, they imagined it would be easy to recruit the other big names they wanted. However, it turned out that the music stars of the world weren't as convinced about the project as the two visionaries were. They needed some convincing, which is where Bob Geldof's game of bluffs came into play. Geldof wouldn't accept the artists' egos of feeling like they were too big to play for the event. What could possibly be more important than stopping the world's worst famine crisis of the century? He then did what he had to do. Good old lies. As the production manager of Live Aid, Andy Zweck, recalled, Bob had to play some tricks to get artists involved. He had to call Elton and say, Queen are in and Bowie's in, and of course they weren't. Then he'd call Bowie and say, Elton and Queen are in. It was a game of bluff, and it worked. Once rumors started to go around that other superstars were going to be in on it, bands and artists suddenly didn't want to miss out. A solid Hail Mary from Bob Geldof. One after the other, Geldof and Ure managed to pull of one name bigger than the next. The list grew longer and longer. For the UK concert, names like David Bowie, Queen, Dire Straits, and Elton John appeared. Whilst in the US, the list included the likes of Eric Clapton, Mick Jagger, Madonna, and Bob Dylan. However, although the list comprised some of the biggest names in music at the time, there were several artists that didn't want to be on board for the ambitious event, with 3 artists especially standing out. The first person that might come to mind is the boss himself, Bruce Springsteen. Recalling Geldof's interview in early January 1985, Springsteen was one of the names he envisioned to be on the set list. However, the problem was that Springsteen had been going on with the Born in the USA tour for a long time, close to non-stop, and was going to continue in the US in August. In fact, he had just played at London sometime before Live Aid, and even borrowed some of his stage set to the event. To add on his busy life, he had just been married to the model and actress Julianne Phillips in May, and wanted to get back home to be with her. People also suspect that Springsteen underestimated the size of Live Aid. Additionally, we all know that he is not exactly a fan of doing just 3 to 4 songs during a concert, which may have been a factor. Springsteen later said that he regretted not showing up and playing some acoustic numbers. Another name that surprisingly didn't take part at the Live Aid concert was arguably the biggest star of the time, the king of pop, Michael Jackson. As mentioned, Michael Jackson was even one of the co-writers for USA for Africa's We Are the World, so he was clearly expected to be on the set list. Unfortunately though, the timing wasn't perfect for Michael, as he was working on his own project at the time. His press agent Norman Winter told the New York Times that Michael is just about living in the studio, rehearsing and recording. I know what could be more major than Live Aid, but Michael couldn't turn his back on his responsibility to the people he's working with. This affected employment for a lot of people. What was the project? Most likely the legendary album Bad. Given the fact that Michael Jackson founded the charity Heal the World in 1992, with the purpose of providing medicine to children and fighting world hunger, his decision to focus on finishing Bad is probably justified, given its financial success of selling almost 40 million copies. One last name worth mentioning in the list of artists not being part of the concert is the legendary singer-songwriter Stevie Wonder, who was also featured on the song We Are the World. However, Wonder's answer was a bit different than the others who refused. He plainly said he didn't want to take part. The reason was because he thought there weren't enough African-American artists on the bill. Apparently, he did at some point agree to appear, but dropped out beforehand and reasoned, "I am not going to be the token black on the show." With that said, we should recognize that Geldof did manage to do some extraordinary work in recruiting bands that most people would consider an impossible task. Not exactly sure how he pulled it off, Live Aid turned out to feature several impressive band reunions, all of which were broken up at the time. The first one being The who essentially invented the farewell tour concept in 1982, when they said the tour was their last hurrah, and ended it in Toronto on December 17th. But little did they know that they would get a not taking no for an answer Geldof at their door. Pete Townshend was especially reluctant to join the concert, but in his memoir, Who I Am, Townshend recalls the response of Live Aid organizer Geldof upon discovering his ambivalence. "If the Who appear, we know we will get an additional £1 million of revenue," Townshend remembers him saying. "Every pound we make will save a life. Do the f***ing math and do the f***ing show." And that was it. The Who was in. Another band that we were lucky to see back together was Black Sabbath. As for Black Sabbath, it was a different story. At the time of Live Aid, the band was close to non-existent after Ozzy had established himself as a solo superstar, and the remainder of the band had suffered a disastrous tour. Eventually, the band agreed to reunite for the concert, even with some hope that this would be a reuniting for good. Tony Iommi, the guitarist, wrote in his 2011 memoir, Iron Man, We probably thought that it might be the first step towards getting back together again. We got to the rehearsal space and were supposed to rehearse 3 songs. Instead of doing that, we ended up talking about old times. We went back to the bar afterwards, had a great time together, and got solidly sloshed. They went on stage 9:52 a.m. with a dreadful hangover and sunglasses on and played Children of the Grave, Iron Man and Paranoid in the bright sunlight. And then we have Led Zeppelin. When it comes to the reunion of Led Zeppelin, people has gone as far as to calling it the worst reunion ever. Led Zeppelin's much-hyped reunion at Live Aid in 1985 turned out to be a major letdown. The anticipation was sky high, but the performance fell flat due to a combination of factors. Robert Plant's vocal issues, stemming from a lack of preparation, were evident, while Jimmy Page's guitar was noticeably out of tune. Also, Phil Collins was stepping in on drums, in which Jimmy Page blamed him for shambolic drum playing. These technical and performance-related problems overshadowed what was supposed to be a triumphant return for the band. Despite the internal struggles and personal challenges they were facing, Led Zeppelin's lackluster showing left both fans and critics disappointed. Their Live Aid performance remains a testament to a missed opportunity rather than a celebrated comeback. There was, however, one missed reunion which was, maybe from a fan base perspective, the most wanted reunion of all, namely a Beatles reunion. Organizers of the concert expressed a strong desire to have at least one surviving member of the Beatles, ideally Paul McCartney, participate in the event. They believed that having a prominent figure like McCartney, considered an elder statesman of British music, would lend greater legitimacy to the concert in the eyes of political leaders. McCartney eventually agreed to perform, attributing his decision to his children's encouragement. There was obviously a strong desire to have George Harrison and Ringo Starr accompanying McCartney, maybe even with John Lennon's son Julian filling in for his father. George Harrison, who had already arranged the charity concert, the Concert for Bangladesh, in aid for homeless Bengali refugees of the Bangladesh Liberation War some 14 years before, may have been expected to show interest in another charity event. However, Geldof and his team didn't manage to get them on board. Although there is no definite answer as to why the two legends didn't join, it is rumored that they feared that they were tricked into a Beatles reunion, which they didn't think felt right. However, great artists and bands weren't the only thing that needed to be fixed. There was one more major issue that needed to be sorted out. Where and how should the concerts be held? This is where Harvey Goldsmith and Bill Graham comes into the picture, both brought in by Geldof to organize the stages. Goldsmith stated in an interview that it wasn't much of a question, but more a demand. "I didn't really get a chance to say no. Bob arrived in my office and basically said, 'We're doing this.' It started from there." Goldsmith is an English performing arts promoter and had the responsibility for the UK concert, whilst Graham, also a concert promoter, had the responsibility of the US concert. As for Goldsmith, he couldn't see any other options than doing the concert at the Wembley Stadium, which at this point wasn't hard to arrange given the size of the event. As for the US Stadium, the organizers were lucky to have the producer Tony Verna on their team, as he was able to secure the John F. Kennedy Stadium through his friendship with Philadelphia Mayor Wilson Goode. So, the stadiums turned out to be rather easy to fix. What became the real challenge was broadcasting. At the time, the concert was the biggest international satellite television project ever attempted. The concert eventually lasted for over 16 hours, which was truly an ambitious task to take on. In Europe, the BBC took charge of the TV feed with a stellar lineup of hosts, including Richard Skinner, Andy Kershaw, and others. While the BBC's television sound feed was in stereo, the TV sound was mono, causing synchronization issues due to the different transmission methods. Luckily though, the BBC Radio 1 feed was stereo and was simulcast in sync with the TV pictures. In the US, ABC handled the broadcast, airing the final 3 hours hosted by Dick Clark, with earlier acts syndicated through Orbis Communications. MTV also provided a simultaneous feed in stereo. Actor Jack Nicholson served as the host for the televised segment of the concert held in Philadelphia. The BBC telecast was run advertising-free, but that was not the case for the MTV and ABC broadcasts, which led to the omission of several performances for the people watching in the US. The ABC coverage faced challenges in scheduling as well, with certain acts reserved for prime time, resulting in segments being replaced or rearranged. Despite these issues, the concert's impact was immense, with later rebroadcasts by VH1 and Much Music. The event also marked a milestone for the BBC's outside broadcast sound equipment, as it was the first time it was used for such a big event. What was interesting here was that when setting up the equipment used for the event, the mainstream entertainment realized that their technical expertise couldn't come close to that of the rock concert industry. With artists, bands, stages, and broadcasting all meticulously organized, anticipation soared as the world prepared to witness legendary performances. While the Live Aid concert as a whole was a monumental success etched into history, certain acts shone brighter than the rest, leaving an indelible mark on the hearts and minds of all who experienced them.
And Mick says, and I'll never forget these words, "Boy, look like you."
There was much anticipation about a transatlantic duet between Mick Jagger and David Bowie, with Bowie playing in London and Jagger in Philadelphia, both at the same time. However, technical challenges arose regarding synchronization, leading to the practical solution of having one artist, likely Bowie at Wembley, mime to pre-recorded vocals while Jagger performed live from Philadelphia. Renowned music engineer David Richards, known for his work with Pink Floyd and Queen, was enlisted to create footage and sound mixes for each artist's venue. The BBC was tasked with ensuring synchronization of these mixes while conducting a live vision mix of footage from both locations. However, due to signal delays across the Atlantic, it was determined that Jagger wouldn't be able to hear or see Bowie's performance, nullifying any potential interaction between the two artists. Moreover, both artists balked at the idea of miming at what was considered a significant event. What happened instead was that the two musicians teamed up with Richards and pre-recorded a cover of Martha Reeves and the Vandellas' 1964 hit Dancing in the Street. The recording featured a video rendition for the song, in which Bowie and Jagger, well, danced in the street. The video was shown on screen at both stadiums and broadcasted worldwide. Even though the initial plan didn't involve releasing the record, its overwhelming popularity led to its release in September '85. It swiftly soared to the top spot in 9 countries, including the UK, further bolstering the funds raised. Another performance that was a hot topic, but for different reasons, was Bob Dylan's performance in Philadelphia. Before launching into When the Ship Comes In, he dropped a bold statement declaring, "I hope that some of the money that's raised for the people in Africa, maybe they can just take a little bit of it, maybe 1 or 2 million, maybe, and use it, say, to pay the mortgages on some of the farms, and the farmers here owe to the banks." His words ignited a debate, especially when he was misquoted as saying, "Wouldn't it be great if we did something for our own farmers right here in America?" In his autobiography, Geldof didn't mince words about Dylan's statement. He criticized it sharply, accusing Dylan of missing the point of Live Aid entirely. He displayed a complete lack of understanding of the issues raised by Live Aid. Live Aid was about people losing their lives. There is a radical difference between losing your livelihood and losing your life. Yet despite the backlash, Dylan's words sparked something unexpected. They inspired fellow musicians Willie Nelson, Neil Young, and John Mellencamp to take action. Together, they organized the Farm Aid charity with its inaugural concert held in September 1985. A more funny remark on Dylan's performance at Live Aid was when his guitar strings snapped while playing with Rolling Stone members Keith Richards and Ronnie Wood. Wood then proceeded to give Dylan his own guitar and just stand on the stage, shrugging to the audience and starting playing air guitar before receiving a new one himself. Another man who achieved something pretty remarkable was Phil Collins. Collins was the only artist playing at both venues during the concert. He first performed Against All Odds and In the Air Tonight at Wembley. Then he took a helicopter from Wembley to Heathrow Airport, then a Concorde flight to New York City, before taking another helicopter to Philadelphia. He then performed the same 2 songs and said, "I was in England this afternoon. Funny old world, innit?"
It's some of the biggest and best-known groups around the world taking part. Why not us?
And finally, the greatest performance of them all. Voted as the greatest live performance in the history of rock and roll in an industry poll in 2005, Queen's 21-minute power set stole the show. It was Freddie Mercury's perfect stage, the whole world.
All right!
But what really made their performance so memorable? Firstly, Freddie Mercury's vocals and stage charisma is unmatched. But that wasn't necessarily unique for this concert. He gave it all every time they performed. What was different this time was its purity. They weren't able to have their usual stage shows of lighting, smoke, pyrotechnics, and special effects. It was only their music and Freddie's stage presence. Also, Freddie's outfit was basic, a white tank top and blue jeans, contrary to his usual glamour. The performance also stood out compared to the other performances because Queen managed to create a power set of their greatest hits, going one after the other non-stop, as well as interacting with the crowd in a way only Freddie Mercury was capable of. And one last thing that is often overlooked is the sound engineer Trip Khalif, who was hired by Bob Geldof to be the sound engineer for Live Aid, but was also Queen's own sound engineer. When Queen took the stage, the limiters, which had been set for all performances, were cranked up by Khalif, amplifying Queen's sound to a much higher level than that of the preceding bands. Once Queen finished their set, he promptly reset the limiters back to their original levels. The sum of all these factors resulted in the greatest rock and roll show ever seen, packed in just 21 minutes. Live Aid truly became a great success, leaving an indelible mark in history. It's easy to get drawn into the greatness of the concert itself, but recalling the initial reason as to why Geldof and Ur started this project in the first place, the famine relief in Ethiopia, one might consider, what was the ultimate impact of the event? First of all, the broadcasting had an enormous reach. In addition to the 160,000 people showing up at the stadiums, an estimated audience of 1.9 billion people across the world tuned in for the television broadcast. That's nearly 40% of the world population at the time. During the concerts, viewers were continuously encouraged to contribute to the Live Aid cause. The BBC efficiently managed 300 phone lines, facilitating public donations via credit cards. Every 20 minutes, the phone number and an address for check donations were reiterated, ensuring easy access for viewers wishing to support the cause. As the London concert approached its 7th hour, Bob Geldof eagerly inquired about the total funds raised, learning it amounted to about £1.2 million. Disheartened by the figure, he swiftly made his way to the BBC commentary position. In the interview with BBC, presenter David Hepworth, who was attempting to provide a postal address for potential donations, Geldof intervened, passionately exclaiming, "F the address, let's get the numbers." He further urged people to send money.
Get on the phone and take the money out of your pocket. Don't go to the pub tonight, please. Stay in and give us the money.
The comment has been commonly misquoted as, "Give me your f***ing money," and made funny newspaper headlines the following days. The interview made donations increase to £300 per second. What boosted the donations even more was a video showing starving and diseased Ethiopian children at big screens at each stadium, with the song Drive by The Cars playing in the background. Initially, Geldof had disallowed the video to be shown due to time constraints, but David Bowie then offered to remove his song 5 Years from his setlist in order to free time so the video could be shown. Once again, is Bowie demonstrating his qualities as a true gentleman. Interestingly enough, during the concert, Geldof noted that the Republic of Ireland, despite facing a severe economic recession, provided the highest donations per person. The biggest contribution, amounting to £1 million, came from Rashid bin Saeed Al Maktoum, a member of Dubai's ruling family. Following the event, reports indicated that between £40 and £50 million had been raised. Present estimates suggest that the concerts have generated around £150 million in total for famine relief. However, the impact wasn't only limited to the amount of money collected related to the concert, it also had a much bigger political impact. It placed humanitarian concern at the center of foreign policy for Western governments. After the concert, Geldof said, "We took an issue that was nowhere on the political agenda, and through the lingua franca of the planet, which is not English but rock and roll, we were able to address the intellectual absurdity and the moral repulsion of people dying of want in a world of surplus." So how on earth could a project aiming to help the famine relief in Ethiopia by gathering the greatest musicians alive for an epic concert possibly receive criticism? Well, there are mainly two answers to this. Firstly, there were several concerns as to whether the relief funds intended for the victims actually found its right way and not ended up in the wrong hands. Doctors Without Borders, a charity providing humanitarian medical care, had issued warnings regarding the Ethiopian government's involvement, led by Derg leader Mengistu Haile Mariam, in instigating the famine. By collaborating directly with Mengistu, a significant portion of the relief funds earmarked for famine victims were rumored to be diverted to procure arms from the Soviet Union. The American television commentator Bill O'Reilly, despite admiring Geldof's philanthropy, criticized Live Aid's oversight of raised funds, arguing for charity organizations rather than chaotic nations to manage donations. David Reef echoed similar concerns in The Guardian, suggesting that Live Aid's actions, while well-intentioned, inadvertently caused harm. Addressing O'Reilly's remarks on Meet the Press, Tim Russert questioned Bono about these concerns. Bono agreed that corruption posed a significant threat to Africa, supporting the notion that foreign relief organizations should control fund allocation. However, he argued that it was preferable to risk some funds falling into the wrong hands than to withhold aid due to fear of theft, emphasizing the importance of aiding those in need despite challenges. Secondly, the initiative has been criticized due to its portrayal of Africa, inadvertently solidified damaging stereotypes, maintaining a narrative of a broken continent in need of saving. Moki Makura, the executive director of Africa No Filter, emphasized in a Guardian article that while Live Aid undeniably brought attention to Ethiopia's plight and raised substantial funds, its aftermath birthed what some refer to as the Save Africa industry. He argued that the narrative it promotes undermines African agency and perpetuates dependency, hindering progress towards a more equitable partnership between Africa and the global community. There will always be critics, but they can't take away the fact that Live Aid was and will always be the ultimate rock concert driven by philanthropic passions and good-hearted intentions. The event brought together the greatest musicians of its time for an incredible performance that will be remembered for centuries. In fact, I'm somewhat surprised that Live Aid isn't part of the school curriculum. That's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. See you in the next one.